It was a day I will never forget, a day that seemed like any other, but in a single moment, everything I once believed was turned upside down. That morning, I left for work as usual, kissed my husband goodbye, and texted my best friend to see if she was free for coffee later. There were no signs, no clues that today would be any different. But sometimes, life has a way of hitting you with the unexpected when you're least prepared. Around noon, I got a message from my boss saying that the big meeting we'd been preparing for had been canceled. At first, I was annoyed. After all, I had rushed all morning to get ready for something that ended up being pointless. But then I thought maybe this was a good thing. I decided to leave work early and surprise my husband. I figured we could go out to dinner or at least spend some time together, especially since we hadn't had much of that lately. I drove home in a pretty good mood, imagining the surprised look on his face when I walked in early. He'd be confused, but happy. We'd probably order takeout, open a bottle of wine, and have a nice evening together at least. That's what I thought. When I pulled up to the house, everything seemed normal. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. But when I stepped through the front door, something felt off. It was too quiet. Usually, when he's home, there's some kind of noise, either the TV is on, or I can hear him talking on the phone. But this time, there was nothing but silence. I called out his name, thinking maybe he was in the shower, but there was no response. That's when I heard a faint sound of laughter coming from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. But even then, I didn't think the worst. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he was watching a funny video or had a friend over. But as I took a few more steps inside, something made me stop dead in my tracks. There were 2 wine glasses on the kitchen counter and a woman's purse on the couch. It wasn't mine. I stared at that purse, my mind struggling to make sense of it. It looked familiar, too familiar. It was my best friend's. A chill ran down my spine, but still, I clung to denial. Maybe she'd just come by to drop something off, maybe they were just hanging out. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm as I walked toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. The laughter from upstairs grew louder, and with it, so did the sinking feeling in my stomach. But I kept telling myself I was overreacting. They wouldn't do this. They couldn't, not my husband, not my best friend. We had known each other for years, trusted each other. As I reached the top of the stairs, I stopped again to listen. More laughter and then whispers. Soft, intimate. I recognized those voices too well. My legs felt like they were about to give out, but somehow, I managed to walk down the hallway toward our bedroom. The door was slightly open, just enough for me to see inside, and that's when I saw them. There they were, my husband and my best friend, lying in our bed, tangled in the sheets, laughing, completely oblivious to the fact that I was standing there, watching. My mind went blank. I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even breathe. It was like the world had stopped spinning. This couldn't be real, it had to be a nightmare. But it wasn't, it was happening right in front of me. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. The man I had built a life with, and the woman I trusted more than anyone in the world, lying together in our bed. Laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to storm into the room and demand an explanation, but my legs wouldn't move. My whole body felt numb, like I was floating outside of myself, watching everything from a distance. Finally, I took a step back, and the floor creaked under my foot. That tiny noise broke the spell. They both looked up at the same time, their faces filled with shock. My husband went pale, and my best friend. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. For a moment, none of us said a word. We were all frozen, caught in this terrible moment where everything was out in the open, and there was no way to take it back. Then, my husband scrambled out of bed, tripping over the sheets as he tried to pull his pants on. "I can explain," he stammered. "This isn't what it looks like," but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded ridiculous. He knew, just like I did, that there was no explanation that could make this better. Nothing that could undo what I had just seen. I looked at my best friend. She was still sitting there, clutching the blanket to her chest, her face red with either guilt or embarrassment or maybe both. She didn't say a word, no apology, no attempt to explain herself. She just sat there, staring at me as if waiting for me to tell her what to do. In that moment, everything felt so small. The life I thought I had, The friendships I believed were unbreakable, they all crumbled around me. The woman I had shared so many secrets with, who had been there for me through everything, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The man I had promised to spend my life with had thrown it all away for what? A fling, a moment of weakness. I didn't say a word, I couldn't, my throat felt tight, and my hands were shaking. I just turned around, walked out of the room, and headed for the front door. My husband was calling after me, begging me to stop, to talk, to let him explain. But I couldn't hear him, everything was muffled, like I was underwater. I got into my car, slammed the door, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat there, staring at the house that had once been my safe haven. Now it felt foreign, tainted by betrayal. I started the car and drove without any real destination. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just needed to get away from the house, from the memories, from the people who had shattered my world. Eventually, I ended up at a park where we used to take walks on the weekends. It was always a place that brought me peace, but now it felt like a cruel reminder of the life I thought I had. I parked the car and sat there, watching people walk by with their kids and their dogs, laughing like everything was fine in their world. I felt like a ghost, completely detached from the normal, happy scene around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my husband, of course. I ignored the call, then another and another. He texted too long, rambling messages about how sorry he was, how it was a mistake, how he loved me and didn't want to lose me. But it was too late, the damage was done. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the phone as the messages kept pouring in. Part of me wanted to reply, to scream at him, to tell him exactly how much he had destroyed. But another part of me felt empty, like there was nothing left to say. I had given him everything, my love, my trust, my loyalty. And he had thrown it all away like it meant nothing. Eventually, the text stopped. I guess he realized I wasn't going to respond. I turned off my phone, leaned back in my seat, and for the first time since walking in on them, I let myself cry. The tears came in waves, hot and heavy, until I could barely breathe. It felt like everything inside me was breaking apart, unraveling piece by piece. I don't know how long I sat there, crying in the car. When the tears finally stopped, I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and told myself I had to face reality. I couldn't stay in that park forever, hiding from the truth. But I wasn't going back to that house, not with him there, not after what I had seen. So I drove to my sister's place. She was the only person I could think of who would understand without asking too many questions or trying to fix things. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't say a word. She just pulled me into a hug, and for the first time that day, I felt a little less alone. In the days that followed, everything changed. I moved out of the house, blocked my husband and my so-called best friend from every part of my life, and started the process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy, some days it still isn't. But if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you can't control what people do, you can only control how you respond. Walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best. Some betrayals cut too deep to forgive, and once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Now I'm focusing on healing, rediscovering what makes me happy, and surrounding myself with people who truly care about me. It's a slow process, but it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, I know I deserve better, we all do. And if you've ever been through something like this, just know you deserve better too. After moving out and cutting off all contact, I found myself in a strange limbo. It was as if I were walking through life but not truly living it, just going through the motions. Every morning I would get up, go to work, come home to my sister's place, and try to avoid thinking too much. But that was the hardest part, silencing the thoughts that constantly swirled in my head. How did this happen? How could they betray me like that? Could I have seen it coming? In the first few weeks, I tried to bury myself in work. I took on extra projects, stayed late at the office, and even volunteered for tasks I didn't usually enjoy, just to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how much I worked, there was always that quiet moment at the end of the day, when I was alone, that the reality would hit me all over again. I had lost two of the most important people in my life in a single moment of betrayal. It wasn't just the end of my marriage or my friendship. It was the end of the future I had planned. We had talked about starting a family, about buying a bigger house, about growing old together. All those dreams now felt like lies, shattered pieces of a life that no longer existed. One night, about a month after everything happened, I found myself standing in front of the old house. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I was looking for some kind of closure, or maybe I just wanted to see it one last time. The lights were off, and the house looked as empty as I felt. I stood there for a while, just staring at the place where I had once felt so safe, so loved. But now, it was just a building, bricks and wood, with no warmth left in it. It didn't feel like mine anymore. As I stood there, I realized something. I didn't want to feel like this forever. I didn't want to be consumed by pain, betrayal, and sadness for the rest of my life. Yes, they had broken my heart in the worst possible way, but I couldn't let them have the power to destroy me completely. I deserved better, and I had to believe that better was out there, waiting for me, even if I couldn't see it yet. That realization didn't change everything overnight. Healing was still a slow and painful process, but it was a start. I began to focus on myself, to rediscover the things that made me happy. I went back to the hobbies I had let fall by the wayside: painting, running, reading novels late into the night. I reconnected with old friends who had been quietly waiting for me to reach out, knowing I would need them when I was ready. And slowly, very slowly, I started to let go of the anger, not for their sake, but for mine. Holding on to that bitterness was like drinking poison and expecting them to suffer. It was eating away at me, making it impossible to move forward. So I let it go. I accepted that I would never get the answers or the closure I thought I needed from them. There was no apology that could undo what had been done. The hardest part, though, was learning to trust again. I had built such high walls around myself, afraid to let anyone in, terrified of being hurt again. But life kept moving forward, and so did I. I learned that trust doesn't come all at once. It's something you rebuild, piece by piece, with the right people, and there are good people out there. I found that when I least expected it, people who showed me what real support and care looked like. Friends who didn't judge me for my brokenness, who stood by my side even when I wasn't sure how to stand on my own. Months passed, and eventually, the pain became less sharp. It didn't consume me the way it once did. There were still moments, of course, anniversaries, birthdays, little reminders of the life I once had that would hit me like a wave. But I had learned how to keep my head above water. One day, while walking in the park where I used to feel so out of place, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was subtle at first, just a tiny spark, but it was there. I realized that I had survived something that had once seemed unbearable, and in that survival, I had found strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't the same person I had been before the betrayal, but maybe that was okay. Maybe, just maybe, I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I'm still healing. I don't know when I'll feel completely whole again, or if I ever will. But I'm learning to be okay with that uncertainty. I've stopped trying to rush the process or force myself to move on anyone else's timeline. This is my journey, and I'll take it one step at a time. And who knows, maybe someday, I'll find someone new, someone who will love me the way I deserve to be loved, with honesty, respect, and loyalty. But for now, I'm focusing on me. On rebuilding the parts of myself that were broken, on finding joy in the small things again. And that in itself feels like a victory. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that you can't control how others treat you, but you can control how you rise from it. And I'm determined to rise stronger than ever before.